Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Freediving Podcast, your source for information about training for freediving, not only so you can freedive better, but so you can live the most healthy and epic life possible. I am your host, Renee Blundon, and as always, I will offer information about how to improve your health and nutrition for freediving, how to improve your fitness for freediving, your breathing and mental training, as well as helpful advice and training concepts for freediving in an enjoyable, safe, and sustainable way. This podcast represents the efforts of my own personal research and my trial and error with my freediving training, as well as hopefully and eventually the combined efforts of a public open source information network, which I invite you to join on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/freediving podcast. All are welcome. If you wish to get additional podcasts, they will be on my website at reneeblundon.com/podcast. There, if you'd like, you can also sign up for my newsletter, which begins going out next Friday. And any questions can be sent to me at info@reneeblundon.com. I am a competitive freediver and freediving instructor trainer, and my only goal here is to provide information to help freedivers all over the world improve their freediving performances in a smart and healthy way to hopefully avoid suffering from an injury, a blackout or LMC, overtraining issues, and other accidents and health issues related to freediving training. Thank you for listening. Okay, so having done the introduction, let's get right into the podcast. This episode is part 2 of Nutrition for Freediving and for Improving Your Lung Capacity. So if you haven't listened to part 1 of Nutrition for Freediving, I'd suggest that you listen to that episode first, because this is basically a continuation of what I was talking about there. It was actually supposed to be 1 episode, but I had some technical difficulties, so it ended up being cut in half into 2 episodes. Anyway, in that first episode, I went over the different lung issues in freediving and how these issues seem to be increasing. I spoke about the measles virus because it's a severe respiratory infection, which I think we can learn a lot from just by looking at how they naturally treat and prevent this disease. And one of those natural remedies they're using is vitamin A, which boosts the immune system and makes the lungs and respiratory system stronger and more resilient. So obviously it's going to improve your health for freediving, and I'd hypothesize you'd have less chances of a lung injury and overtraining, and also better recovery, etc. And then I also covered which foods and types of supplements are the best sources for vitamin A, as well as some info about omega-6 oils and omega balance and how that can also affect your lungs and your breathing. And so with vitamin A covered a lot in the last episode, today I'm going to get into some other helpful vitamins to improve your lungs for freediving. So I'll be going over vitamin D and N-Acetyl Cysteine, and I'll also just touch on a few other vitamins and amino acids. So basically, the lung issues that freedivers can consider the nourishment side of the equation to help improve the lungs and the respiratory system are things like if you're having regular lung or trachea squeezes, if you have asthma or allergies, if you have the common cold or sinus issues and congestion, if you feel pressure on your chest either during and or after your dives, or if you're recovering from some type of respiratory virus like COVID-19 or influenza. Now, those are a little bit more serious, obviously, and nutrition can certainly help, but definitely make sure to discuss things with your doctor first. Or maybe you have no issue at all, but you want to improve your recovery between your freediving sessions and you want to improve your immune system so you don't get sick or end up overtraining and getting burned out. So those, I would say, are the most common scenarios that apply to freedivers in which this information can be helpful for. So besides vitamin A, another vitamin that can make all the difference in the world in making your lungs stronger and healthier for freediving is vitamin D. Vitamin D is an essential nutrient that your body needs for so many vital processes. Most people already know that vitamin D is needed by the body to keep your bones and your teeth and your muscles healthy. But it's also super important for the lungs because it helps reduce inflammation in the lungs, it improves lung function and your respiratory muscle strength, as well as your immune response to various respiratory pathogens. So here's an interesting article that actually mentions a bit about the history of vitamin D. I'm always super interested in history, in case you haven't noticed. And it's from theconversation.com, and it's called Why Taking Vitamin D Pills Could Help Fight Against TB and HIV, and it's written by Anna Cousins and Allison Seeger. And there's a part here that says the link between vitamin D and treatment for TB came from antiquated practice. These include giving patients cod liver oil rich in vitamin A and D, and sunbathing TB patients in sanatoriums or under light therapy. And in this article, which is linked on the podcast page, you can see a black and white photo which has like 20 hospital beds all lined up outside with people in them. And it's just pretty neat to see how hospitals back then, back around 1840 or so, they used to use these naturopathic remedies, in this case just plain old sunlight and cod liver oil, to help treat respiratory infections. And then somewhere I read, I can't remember where exactly, it might have been even in the same article, but somewhere it said that the sunlight and cod liver oil helped the patients recover even faster than normal drug treatment for tuberculosis. Now, you certainly don't see this nowadays. Hospitals aren't wheeling people out in their hospital beds out into the sunlight, giving them spoonfuls of cod liver oil. Instead, people are inside all day, just taking pills and eating cafeteria food. So it's just interesting how times change. And the sunlight and cod liver oil, it wasn't just used for people sick with respiratory infections. It was used traditionally just for keeping people healthy, especially in the northern regions of the world during wintertime. So, and keep in mind, they were doing this even before we really knew anything about vitamins. At that time, they hadn't even isolated vitamin D or vitamin A. That didn't happen until about 70 years later. Vitamin A and vitamin D, they weren't even discovered until like 1913. And so anyway, this can start to illustrate the importance of vitamin D for supporting your lungs and your respiratory system in being stronger and healthier for freediving. So cod liver oil, how is it that it's so effective in helping to produce vitamin D in the body? Well, it states in that same article that the way that vitamin D works against TB wasn't unraveled until the early 1980s, when it was discovered that the active form of vitamin D could be produced in immune cells. Nearly 2 decades later, it was discovered that vitamin D caused these immune cells to make a small protein with antimicrobial properties that could kill the TB bacteria. So basically what happens when you have something like cod liver oil, which has high vitamin D content, the bad bacteria of the respiratory infections gets killed off by the body, and the cod liver oil helps to develop these little antimicrobials which help kill off this bad bacteria. So to zoom in a little bit more, there's this protein that's made in the lungs, and it's also made in other tissues of the body. And this particular protein falls into a family of proteins called cathelicidins. And cathelicidins are actually able to kill bad bacteria in the lungs, like the tuberculosis bacteria, for example. But really, it can kill any bacteria or any virus. So the cathelicidins are produced in your cells, and vitamin D helps activate the production of them. So if you're very low in vitamin D, you're probably not going to make enough of these cathelicidins, which means that you don't have them as part of your immune system, so they're not going to be there to directly kill the bacteria, the microbes, and the viruses that come at you. And so you're basically going to get every cold and infection that's going around. You're going to battle with lung issues, and freediving definitely won't be as easy and as joyful as it could be, just because you're lacking important nutrients, which is such an important part of freediving recovery. And that's a big part of the reason why a lot of freedivers get sick and get injuries, and why you probably don't feel as strong and as healthy in the wintertime as you do in the summertime. Even Dahab can get quite cold in the wintertime. I think just about every single freediver I know here gets sick at least once, usually 2 times or even 3 times in the winter season here. Even myself being one of them, I got sick 1 time last year, so it wasn't so bad. But if you think about the flu season, there's a reason why it always happens in the darkest days of the year and not the sunniest days of the year, because the best source of vitamin D we produce from sunlight. And so our vitamin D levels are the lowest in the winter months, a little bit better in the spring and in the fall, and then we have the highest amount of vitamin D in the summertime. And this is because in so many places in the world, the sun just isn't strong enough in those darker months of the year to give us the kind of ultraviolet light exposure that we need in order to produce vitamin D. And it's also cold in a lot of places, so we're all covered up. All of our skin is covered up, and so the vitamin just can't get absorbed. And that's why in wintertime in both hemispheres, keep in mind, this correlates with more often getting sick and colds and congestion, blocked sinuses. And from what I've noticed in other freedivers who train here in the wintertime, and also with my own training in the winter, there's definitely an increase in missed training sessions and also lung and trachea squeezes. I've had basically 2 very minor lung squeezes, and both times happen to be in the winter, and I don't think that's any coincidence. Now, probably some freedivers out there listening might be thinking, well, you're diving in a thicker wetsuit, so you're not as flexible, you're wearing more weight, so it's harder to come up from the dives, you're not as relaxed because you're diving in colder water, all of this. And I'm sure all of that doesn't help either with squeeze issues, but I'd put my money on it that the main reason is because of having a lack of vitamin D and other nutrients. Because looking back, I remember that my overall health, physical and mental, was definitely a bit down in the winter compared to the summertime, where I have really good health and energy and everything. And then in the wintertime, it all just kind of like goes down a bit. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who has this happening. So my point is that these lung issues, it's not that they're not there all year round. They're always there, but it's that our resistance to lung issues is so much better when our vitamin D levels are stronger, which is usually in the summer months. So not only does vitamin D help to produce those cathelicidins, but it also boosts many of the other immune factors. For example, the white blood cells, T cells, and a lot of the different players in the immune system. And when you battle with things and issues, for example, like if you're getting a cold and congestion, or who knows, maybe you're trying to recover from COVID-19. I mean, that's obviously more serious. Maybe you're concerned with your freediving recovery and improving your lung capacity and so forth. Vitamin D becomes a part of the conversation, which is not something a lot of freedivers typically think about. Many freedivers listening might be living in a warm, sunny climate, so maybe they're thinking, I don't need to worry about vitamin D, and probably you don't, at least not until the winter season, if you have a winter season where you are. But just note that if you want to get vitamin D from the sun, which is what I'd personally recommend. It's called the sunshine vitamin for a reason, because the sun is really one of the best sources of this nutrient. And how it works is your skin hosts a type of cholesterol that functions as a precursor to vitamin D. And so when this compound is exposed to UVB radiation from the sun, it then becomes vitamin D. And sun-derived vitamin D, they say, circulates for twice as long as vitamin D than if it's from food or from supplements. So it's obviously a lot better and a lot healthier, but the amount of vitamin D that your body can make via sunlight depends on several variables. For example, your skin tone. People with darker skin need to spend more time in the sun to produce vitamin D than people with lighter skin, because darker skin has more melanin, which is a compound that can inhibit vitamin D production. And then age is also a factor. It can have an impact as you get older. The vitamin D production in your skin becomes less efficient. Then your geographical location can make a difference. So the closer that you live to the equator, the more vitamin D you'll be able to produce almost year-round because of your physical proximity to the sun's rays. But if you live farther away from the equator, then you have less opportunities for adequate sun exposure, which decreases the amount of vitamin D that you can produce. Then also keep in mind certain types of clothing can hinder or even block vitamin D production. So for example, obviously wetsuits or long clothing, you're not getting a whole lot of vitamin D. And then if you put sunblock on, which most freedivers do, it can definitely hinder or even block the vitamin D production. So I'm not recommending to go out there without any sunscreen, because if you're light skinned like me and Irish, you'll end up sunburned and like a lobster all the time. But just note that it doesn't take long for your body to start producing vitamin D. They say it takes just 8 to 15 minutes to make plenty of vitamin D if you have light skin, and maybe a bit more time for people who are darker skinned. So you can go in the sun for 20 minutes or so without sunblock, and then after put sunblock on. Just an idea. And fortunately, because of COVID-19, I think there's been even more interest in health and in nutrition and even in vitamin D these days among freedivers and people in general, just because we all want to stay strong and healthy so we can keep doing fun things and freediving. And now I've noticed that most of the freedivers here in Dahab who are already quite healthy, it seems as though people are erring on the side of caution, just being more conservative with their freediving training. And I don't think this is just because Blue Hole has been closed. I think it's also because there's like zero competition scheduled, and it's very difficult and very expensive to arrange a record attempt. So with a pandemic floating around, I'm not really sure if it's the best time to be doing like some crazy training and pushing your limits and pushing your body and your immune system, especially with this COVID-19 that we just don't know that much about. But it is a great time to assess your nutrition and improve your health for freediving. And so you definitely want to make sure that you're getting enough of these essential nutrients. And this you can do so easily just by adding certain foods to your diet or through supplementation, which I'll talk about in just a bit. But first, let's discuss, how do you know if your vitamin D levels are low? Maybe you have nothing to worry about at all. So should you go to get a vitamin D test in order to know? And if so, what do you look for and how do you interpret the results of the test? Well, in my research about vitamin D tests, there is a blood test that you can get done. But just a note about that, there's been this pretty odd change sometime in the last decade or so in the US. I can't speak about other places really, but they used to say that the normal levels of vitamin D in nanograms per milliliter should be somewhere between 30 and 100. of these nanograms per milliliter. And now, because so many people, their levels were testing below 30, they sort of reconstructed the conversation, saying that if you're in the 20s, then you're probably fine. So there are doctors and educators out there now saying that 20 is the new normal, but it's not normal. It's basically a dumbing down of the system. And by changing the normal ranges, well, this isn't doing anyone any favors when it comes to nutritional status. So for a regular person, you want to be above 30 when it comes to vitamin D levels, because that's the range that promotes better resistance to infections and making your lungs healthier. But 30 is definitely at the very bottom of normal when it comes to vitamin D levels. So as a freediver, I'd suggest that you try and get yourself more in the range of 40 to 60. This way your lungs are even stronger, and so you can recover better and less likely have lung injuries and missed days of training. And also being in that range of 40 to 60 is when you're going to have enough vitamin D circulating to activate to the hormone, which is a very active form of vitamin D. And this really, really boosts the function of those immune cells that are dealing with all those issues. So moving right along here, how to get vitamin D. Sunlight is obviously the best source of vitamin D, as I mentioned before, but if you're not able to get enough vitamin D from the sun because of your location or because of the season, cod liver oil is probably the best food for vitamin D and also vitamin A. Other great food sources are basically any oily fish. So like salmon, sardines, herring, mackerel, also red meat, liver, egg yolks. If you don't have access to those foods, or if you just don't eat those foods because you're on a vegan or vegetarian diet, you can definitely try supplementing with vitamin D until you get a vitamin D test, just to find out where you are at. What I used to take when I supplemented is 5,000 units per day. And then if you go and take a test, and if you find out that you're super deficient, you can ask your doctor how much you should take. So that's basically everything I have on vitamin D. So next, I thought we could touch base on N-Acetyl Cysteine, which is another nutrient that's also quite important to consider for freediving and for improving your lungs and your respiratory system. And the reason why N-Acetyl Cysteine is so important is because it's an amino acid that, along with two other amino acids, glutamine and glycine, N-Acetyl Cysteine is needed to make and replenish something called glutathione. And glutathione is actually one of the body's most important antioxidants. Glutathione neutralizes the free radicals that can damage the cells and the tissues in your body. And it's absolutely essential for immune health and for fighting cellular damage, and so important for your freediving recovery, especially if you're doing deep dives or repetitive dives or just really intensive trainings where oxidative damage can be quite an issue. Now, I was fortunate to find some excellent sources on the oxidative stress caused from freediving, and this is so well known, I think, at this point, that I'm pretty sure it's in all of the freediving school's level 3 freediving course materials. I found one study here. It's titled Oxidative Stress in Breath Hold Divers After Repetitive Dives. And it says that after breath hold diving, more circulating nitric oxide is observed with an increase in peroxynitrates and a reduction of thiols. Nitric oxide may be produced by the physical effort of breath hold diving, physical exercise, the transient hyperoxia, which is excessive oxygen, followed by hypoxia, which is low oxygen, and accumulation of carbon dioxide increase the level of superoxide anion. This facilitates the interaction of superoxide anion with a nitric oxide to form peroxynitrates, opposed to production of thiols. Oxidative stress is thus present in breath hold diving. So I know that's a lot there. Let me break this down for you. When you basically resurface from a free dive, what it's saying is that you have a lot more nitric oxide and peroxynitrates in the body just as a result of the physical effort of the dive. And these two things, nitric oxide and peroxynitrates, also known as nitrogen dioxide, are free radicals. So they have an unpaired electron, and since it's missing one of its electrons, it steals an electron from your stable molecules and therefore damaging your healthy cells. So if you have a lot of this happening, and if you don't recover properly, if you don't eat really healthy and rest and hydrate properly after your free dives, these free radicals can cause a lot of harm to your body. And they say even over time it can cause aging and heart disease and even some cancers. So it's obviously not good. And that's why the amino acids are so important for recovery. The N-Acetyl Cysteine helps your body produce and replenish that glutathione, which is this super powerful antioxidant that goes in and basically donates one of its own electrons, and then this way your molecules are spared the damage. So right after the dive, you have an increase in these free radicals, which is why you want to have antioxidants. And you also have a reduction of what's called thiols. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but anyway, from what it's spelled THIOLS. And from what I understand, these are basically sulfides in the body. And with a lack of sulfides, you have a lack of sulfur, which is the most important element in detoxification in your body. So in your liver, you have these various enzymes that turns toxins into harmless particles. And a lot of these enzymes are sulfur-based. Sulfur is also involved with those three amino acids, the cysteine, the glutamine, and the glycine, which helps produce that glutathione in the body. So with lack of thiols or sulfides, you're basically lacking in sulfur for detoxification, and your glutathione production is taking another hit because of this as well. So with all of that said, combined with the physical effort, then going from a state of high partial pressure of oxygen at depth to low partial pressure of oxygen and hypoxia towards the end of the dive, and then once you're back on the surface, you're back to a kind of normal oxygen level, and also with the accumulation of carbon dioxide, all of this increases that superoxide anion, which is the free radical damage. And all of that together explains why oxidative stress is a major issue in freediving, maybe even more of an issue in freediving than in many other sports. Another website I was on put it really simply as when you surface from a free dive and take that first breath, your oxygen-deprived cells are flooded with oxygen. And since so much oxygen is metabolized, there's a corresponding burst of free radical damage. But as I explained, I think it's more complex than just that, and probably even more complex than what I explained. But you get the idea. The important thing to take away from all of this is that you want to make sure that you're getting the N-acetyl cysteine in your food or with supplementation so that you're helping your body produce and replenish that glutathione, which is a super powerful antioxidant that's just going to be absolutely essential for recovering from the oxidative stress in freediving. And another cool thing about N-acetyl cysteine is it's another one of these elements that improves the body's ability to resist being harmed by toxic compounds that come into the body. So, for example, COVID-19 and other viruses and bacteria, whether you swallow them or breathe them in or whether you touch and absorb them through the skin, It's the glutathione, which is an antioxidant enzyme that's so important in helping the body in all the areas where the body's surface areas interact with the environment, the lungs being a case in point. Because the lungs, what do? They breathe in air, and then the air goes through the surfaces of the lungs right into circulation in the body, and the oxygen from the air helps oxygenate all of our cells. And then you breathe out carbon dioxide. Without breath, there is no life. But if you breathe in contaminated air, those viruses, bacteria, pollution, dust, etc., all end up in the bloodstream too and circulating around the body. And so that's actually why we end up with a lot of these lung issues and respiratory issues, like, for example, when someone sneezes in our face, or maybe someone is breathing in a space that's really close to us, like on the airplane, or the person across the counter from you at the grocery store, or any sort of crowded scenario. And the other thing is that we touch surfaces with our hands, and then we typically, a lot of times, put our hands near our mouth or near our nose, and then we get contaminated. So basically, any areas where we are more likely to interact with the environment, the body produces a lot of glutathione to make your immune system more resilient against these things. And for glutathione, you need N-Acetyl Cysteine. There's an article I have here on covid19-evidence.paho.org, and it's called N-Acetyl Cysteine, a rapid review of the evidence for the effectiveness in treating COVID-19. And it states that N-Acetyl Cysteine was introduced in 1960 as a mucolytic drug for chronic respiratory diseases. And it's still commonly used orally at doses of 600 milligrams per day as a mucolytic. Acetylcysteine makes bronchial mucus less viscous. In vitro cysteine derivatives act by breaking disulfide bridges between macromolecules, which leads to a reduction in mucus viscosity. However, at higher doses, equal or greater than 1200 milligrams, acetylcysteine also acts as an antioxidant through complex mechanisms which can combat conditions of oxidative stress, like we were talking about before. And then it goes on to say it is this potential antioxidant mechanism that has sparked interest with the current COVID-19 pandemic, and whether this might be useful in community settings. Therefore, we aim to conduct a rapid review of N-Acetyl Cysteine with specific emphasis on its potential for early administration in the community for patients at a greater risk of severe COVID-19. So basically what that's saying is N-Acetyl Cysteine is something that makes any mucus that you have in the lungs less viscous, and it basically restates here the fact that it acts as an antioxidant that combats oxidative stress in the body, reduces inflammation because of its vasodilator properties, and now they're studying it for helping people to be more protected against severe COVID-19. And if that's not enough to convince you about N-Acetyl Cysteine, I also found out, I read somewhere, I can't remember where, but quite a few researchers believe that N-Acetyl Cysteine might even contribute to longevity because of the incredible antioxidant properties that are just so important for combating many ailments and such caused by oxidative stress. So it's been shown to improve all sorts of psychiatric and mental issues, infertility, and certain diseases. So it's a very, very helpful and absolutely essential nutrient. So which foods do you find N-Acetyl Cysteine in? It's actually another one of those nutrients that are found in eggs, especially the egg yolk. I mentioned eggs in the first podcast, so this ties right in. Make sure not to throw out the yolk. Eat the egg yolk if you want some of the more important nutrients that can be found in an egg. Cysteine is just an example of one of the many nutrients. And you can also find cysteine in garlic. Cysteine is basically a sulfur compound, and garlic is a sulfurous vegetable. So in fact, most of the cruciferous vegetables are shown to give you really good antioxidant function, but a lot of this is because of the cysteine content. And other foods high in cysteine are lean pork chops, beef skirt steaks specifically, lean chicken breast, tuna, lentils, oatmeal, low-fat yogurt, sunflower seeds, and Swiss cheese. You can also supplement with N-acetyl cysteine if you don't think you're getting enough of it through those foods, or maybe you just have a history of kind of lung issues. It can be helpful to supplement as part of sort of your daily program, since it's one of those things that can really help the body produce that glutathione, which is going to help boost your immune system. The recommended dose for N-acetyl cysteine is 200 milligrams per day, and some websites are suggesting doing multiple doses throughout the day if you have a lung issue until you feel like you're more resilient. Oh, and something I forgot to mention in the last podcast is about the supplementation for omega-3. So omega-3, the recommended dose is 1,500 to 2,000 of EPA plus DHA. So make sure to read the label so you can confirm that that's the amount that you're getting. And I think that's pretty much a wrap between this episode and the last one. We talked a lot about vitamin A and vitamin D, omega-3s, balancing omega-3s and omega-6, as well as N-acetyl cysteine. And I know that a lot of times when people think about improving the lungs and the respiratory system and the immune system, they go straight to vitamin C. And I didn't even talk about vitamin C because there's all these other nutrients that are also so important for resilience and resistance to viruses and infections, and so important for your lungs and your health for freediving. So I thought that I should spend more time on those ones rather than something like vitamin C. But really, everyone who pays attention to nutrition are going to understand the importance and the needs for vitamin C for just so many aspects of human health. We can't live without it. We have to take it or get it in our food. And probably in the future, I'll do an entire podcast episode just about vitamin C. So yeah, those are, I'd say, the most important nutrients for supporting your lungs and your respiratory system for freediving and boosting your immune system and increasing your lung capacity. So this way you stay healthy and so you can recover better from that oxidative stress of freediving. So any freediver who's interested in improving their nutrition can go by the info in these two podcasts. If you can get your vitamins through food and lifestyle choices, like sunlight, for example, this is great. Otherwise, if you can't, supplementation is definitely an option. So that will conclude this episode of the podcast. Next week, I hope to have some more helpful information, and I'll be changing the theme and the topic. I'm still deciding on that, so I'll keep you posted. Feel free to follow me on Instagram if you would like. I'm at Renee Blundon, and you can also find me on Facebook at Renee Blundon. So I would definitely love for you to join the group. You can find that at facebook.com/groups/freediving podcast. And please share this and dive safe. Thank you all very much for listening.